Hey friends, what's up? It's Madurik from the Wilder Racing Academy, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about using a wheel and pedals to play Midnight in Miami by Wilder World. So I'm going to be talking about what settings to focus on adjusting, as well as some tips and tricks on how to get faster and more precise with your driving. So if you're thinking of moving from a controller or a keyboard to using a wheel and pedal setup, or if you've already taken that jump, there are a lot of things to consider. There are a ton of products out on the market, and once you get into it, there are a lot of settings to adjust in the software for the wheel and pedals. So my focus for this video is not to tell you that a wheel and pedal setup is better than anything else, or that it will make you faster. I'm not even going to talk about what wheel and pedal setup I think you should buy. I'll certainly talk about what I use and why, but my goal rather is to talk about the settings that you need to focus on. And there's only two important ones to keep it simple so that you could get the maximum amount of impact on getting faster, quicker, and more precise. So I always found that using a wheel and pedal is the most immersive way to enjoy online racing games. But like with anything, there's a learning curve. So the goal is let's shorten that learning curve and get you faster and having more fun as soon as possible. So before we get into talking about the settings to adjust and the techniques of using a wheel and pedal, let's make sure that we have a basic concept of the lingo and the terms that go along with using this gear. So the first concept we're going to talk about is compatibility. Pretty easy to understand. Obviously, we want to make sure that the wheel and pedal system that we buy is going to work with both the system we're plugging it into and the game we're playing. At the time of this video, Midnight in WIami is only available on a PC, and as far as I know, all the wheel and pedal setups that are out there are compatible on a PC. If you also want to play other games on like an Xbox or PlayStation, check the compatibility before you get into anything there. Now, as far as what brands work with Midnight in WIami, I am on a Fanatec motor and pedals, so I do know that those work just fine. Other systems that are popular like Logitech, Thrustmaster, Camus, I know that other people use these without a problem as well. If you have any questions about this, you could always jump into the Discord of Wilder World and find one of the admins and see if they can get an answer for something that's not already listed or that I've already mentioned. So the second concept we're going to talk about is the motor, and this is what you attach the wheel to, which creates all the resistance and friction that you feel when you play and when you turn the wheel. So there's two types that we're going to talk about. The first is belt-driven, and the second is direct drive. So belt-driven motors are usually entry-level products. They use a system of belts and pulleys to create the resistance that you feel. Because they're more entry-level, they're going to be obviously more affordable, but they're not as accurate, they're not as smooth, and they can't put out the same amount of force that you feel when you play. Direct drive motors are going to be using a system, I believe, of magnets to actually create the friction. Because of this, they're freestanding, so they're very, very smooth, and they're very, very accurate. And they can also put out a ton of force depending on what model you get to. Now, direct drive motors are becoming much more popular, and the price of entry to these are going way down. So at this point, when I'm talking about making this video and getting into this, the direct drive pretty much is the way to go. Belt-driven are still great, but you'll probably outgrow them pretty quickly once you get used to the basics. So check out entry-level direct drive motors from a lot of brands that are out there, and they're all going to be great. All the reviews that I've read are awesome for every product that's pretty much out there, so you can't really go wrong, and they have something almost in the exact same price point that you could find the belt-driven motors in. All right, the third concept we're going to talk about is force feedback. This is in relation to the wheel and the motor, and it's basically a measurement of the amount of resistance that the wheel puts out. So this is what gives you the feeling of you're actually turning and the car is responding and pushing back on what you do. Now, the measurement is measured in Newton meters, and it ranges from anywhere on the low end to about 2.5 all the way up to 25 Newton meters. Now, something like the Logitech G29, that's a belt-driven motor, is around 2.5 Newton meters. So it's not going to put out a ton of force, but you will feel the resistance, but you won't get as much detail. Now, on the high end, you're getting up to 25 Newton meters in some of the very pro-level direct drive motors. Now, anyone that's getting into this is not going to need that much resistance. usually what happens is it gives you more level of detail if you go higher. But I assure you that if you set your wheel to 25 Newton meters of force, you're going to be sore as hell just after one race. I use the Fanatec CSL DD motor, and it has the power boost up to 8 Newton meters. So my wheel and motor setup can do up to 8 Newton meters of torque. And I guarantee you that it's plenty, especially if you're just getting started. Even with that amount, I've had issues with shoulder and with, finger pain after I really dove into it hard. So there's plenty of force in that 5 to 8 Newton meter range. But again, it goes up higher and higher depending on the level that you want to get into it and the level that you want to feel both detail and resistance. So concept number 4 is going to be in relation to the pedals, and specifically the brake pedal, which is arguably the most important component of a wheel and pedal setup. Now, the two types of brake pedals we're going to talk about are a potentiometer-based pedal and a load cell pedal. All right. Now, a potentiometer pedal is based upon the movement of the pedal. So the amount of braking will be determined about where the pedal is in a range of motion. Now, potentiometer pedals usually don't increase much resistance as you push them. They're usually very light and it feels very soft, much more like a regular car will feel. Okay, and again, these are going to be more in your entry-level products, and it's actually something I'd almost advise using more so in Midnight and WIami, which we'll get into in a minute. However, a load cell brake pedal uses a set of either springs or load cells to determine the amount of pressure. Now, a load cell pedal adjusts the amount of braking based upon pressure, not the amount of throw or where a pedal is in a range of motion. Now, load cell pedals are very, very stiff. They're mimicking what is actually used in race cars. Now, I've never really raced in a real race car, but for what I hear, the braking pedal is nothing like a regular car. It is very, very stiff. But the advantage of a load cell pedal is that they usually allow you to be more and more accurate as you get used to the amount of pressure that's used. So, I actually am using a load cell pedal. I have the CSL Elite V2 pedal from Fanatec. When I did my research in getting into this, I found it was the best bang for your buck as far as all the reviews I read, and I do like it a lot. However, the thing that I'd say about Midnight and WIami, at least as it exists right now on the build that we're on, is that most of the braking that you do is very quick, and it does not need to be held on for long, and you're usually braking at about 80 to 90% pressure. So when you're playing other more advanced sims like Assetto Corsa, iRacing, anything that's a lot more accurate as far as a real racing experience, you're going to have tracks and conditions that do call for a lot more advanced braking techniques. There's techniques such as trail braking that really play into needing a very sensitive pedal. However, in Midnight and WIami, because you're very much dealing with an on or off type of brake situation, potentiometer pedals are just fine and almost easier because you could just kind of very quickly hit them and you're good to go. But I'm going to talk about how to adjust this no matter what setup that you use to be more accurate and have a better experience using it in-game. So the fifth concept we're going to be talking about is relative to the brake pedals that we just mentioned, and it's going to be one of the two settings that we're going to focus on adjusting in our software, and this is brake sensitivity. And it's basically just the amount of pressure that's needed to equal 100% braking. All right. Now, depending on what you use, most software systems for your gear will allow you to adjust how much is going to be 100% braking. So on my load cell pedal, in the software that I use, if I only want to be able to tap the pedal to get to 100% braking, I could do that. Otherwise, a load cell pedal, at least the one that I'm using, can take up to 90 kilograms of force to equal 100% braking. And that is literally me pushing so hard that my whole body is going to push back into my seat. All right? So very important to understand that when you're using, an official race car setup and using load cell pedals, they take a lot of force, but even if you have that, you don't need to have it set that much by adjusting the brake sensitivity. We'll get more into that as we go, but for now, we're just talking about the concept. Okay, the sixth and final concept we're going to talk about is steering sensitivity. This is obviously in relation to the steering wheel, and it's going to be the second adjustment that we're going to talk about to really zone in and hone in our rig to make it the most playable. Now, the steering sensitivity is an adjustment to tell the motor in the game how much input you want the wheel to equal when in terms of how much you turn it. Now, more advanced games and simulators have an auto feature that automatically will just tell the system what works best. So when you turn the wheel 90 degrees, it knows that the car and the wheels itself should turn 90 degrees. Now, other systems and other games, sometimes you need to use a manual mode, and that's where we're at right now with Midnight in WIami. This will probably be updated at some point in the future, but it's also a setting that you might not want to use auto because there's other techniques that we're going to talk about when I go into a live example about using a different setting might help. Now, the basic gamut of the settings is that something like a regular motor or wheel usually has about 900 degrees of turning. That is 2.5 full rotations, which is basically what a real car does. Now, you never really need to use that much unless you're playing games that are something like rally car or drifting, where you have a regular wound wheel and you need to turn it a lot to get through certain corners or parts of the track. Now, Midnight in WIami, it's all street racing. So there's really not that many turns that are more than 90 degrees. There's some, but you're not doing anything too drastic. So you're never going to need to turn the wheel more than 90, actually, I should say 180 degrees in one direction. So something like 360 degrees is a good place to start. However, once we get into examples, I'll be talking about why you might want to test using smaller settings to make it more reactive to the way you drive. So before I jump into the software and talk about settings and in-game techniques, I did quickly want to touch upon talking about the different types of wheels that are out there, as well as what I use in my rig. So when I first started, I did buy a second-hand setup that was a Logitech G29 wheel and pedals. And it was great. It was very inexpensive, and it was super fun to get into the hobby itself. Now, before I started playing Midnight in WIami, I did upgrade into a full Fanatec setup. And what I went with was a package deal where I got the CSL Elite V2 pedals, and that's with a load cell brake. The wheel I got was the McLaren V2 wheel, and then I also got the CSL DD motor that was 8 Newton meters. They had a 5 Newton meter and an 8 Newton meter that is a little bit more expensive, but again, it puts out a little more power. Now, and that's what I'm currently using. Now, the wheels, I did change a couple things. So this is the Club Sport RS wheel, which is obviously a standard full wheel, okay? This is an awesome, awesome wheel if you like the, the general classic wheel style. And it's great, but I don't use it as much. I did for a while use the McLaren V2 wheel, but then I upgraded it to this here, which is the SimMagic GT Neo. And this is obviously a different brand, and it uses an adapter. So I'm not going to get into all of that, but you can use different wheels and pedals, and you don't need to stay within one ecosystem of a brand. This is what we call a yoke style wheel, and it's obviously more, adapt to using and playing and driving cars that are either GT cars or Formula cars. I love this style. One of the things that's great about it is that, it forces you to keep your hands in the 10 and 2 position, which is definitely where you want them to be, okay? As a first technique tip, you always want to be in the 10 and 2 position. You don't want to be up at, the 9 and 3 position, okay? You don't want your hands at 10 and 2, and you don't want everything moving around. The best, most control you'll have is keeping your hands in that position. And that is what a yoke style, wheel will do. And it just looks cool, it's comfortable, and so that is what I use. And those are the different types of wheels that are out there if you're kind of looking at different brands and different things. But again, use what looks cool to you, look at reviews, and give it your best shot. Okay, so now that we got all that covered, let's jump into some software and talk about the two main settings that we're going to focus on adjusting for the sake of this video. Okay, so here we are inside of the Fanatec software that controls all the settings for my wheel, my motor, and my pedals. And as you can see, there's a lot of different settings here depending on what interface we're working with. So whether it's the pedals, if we have a shifter, we have this full tuning menu with all these different settings that we have to worry about. Now, the two that we're going to worry about again are steering sensitivity and brake sensitivity. Let's start off with steering, okay? We can adjust this in a couple different places. I'm going to do it at the wheelbase level here because what you'll be able to see is how this adjustment affects the settings. So the wheel sensitivity in the Fanatec software, you'll be able to find this in whatever system you use. So it might be named something a little bit differently, but the idea is going to be the same. So you can see that we have this sensitivity here. Now, if I set it all the way up, it's going to be auto. And that's for games that are able to automatically adjust the sensitivity. Again, Midnight in WIami at the current build that we're on, which is 3.4. We should be expecting 0.4 very soon, but we're on 0.3.4. And it's currently not adaptable to auto sensitivity. So if we were to start out at the normal 360 degrees, let's set it there, okay? Now, what we'll notice is if we center the wheel and we turn it 90 degrees, we're going to get about to 2.5 of those dashes. So if you look at where the wheel is, when I turned it 90 degrees, it's giving that much output. It's giving that much steering output. If I go all the way 180, I'm 180 degrees turned with the wheel, okay? Now, if I go the opposite direction, it's the same. So that's a good place to start. Now, why would we want to lower this for something like Midnight in WIami? Okay, and this is where you got to play with this. But let's take an example of a 90-degree turn. Okay, if I want to make a 90-degree turn with this sensitivity set at 360, I'm going to turn my wheel 90 degrees, and that should induce a 90-degree turn of the wheels. Now, because you don't need to turn that much, sometimes that might be too much to be able to be accurate. The other thing to mention is that right now in this current build, there really is not any force feedback in Midnight in WIami. I'm sure that'll be something that supports it in future versions. However, at the moment, there really is no force feedback. There's a little bit at very slow speeds, but once you get moving, there really isn't much force feedback, so you can't really feel the turns. So, because of that, it's very hard to tell when you have turned enough to get the car where you want. Because without that resistance, it's hard to tell if you're oversteering or understeering. And that is a very big factor. Now, most of the cars in Midnight in WIami understeer, which means that the more you turn the wheel, it doesn't keep turning the car. The car is not able to turn more due to its physics. And because of that, it's very easy to turn the wheel too much, and then when you want to unwind it, you're already too late or you're facing in the wrong direction. So, sometimes it's a good idea to try using something like 300 degrees. So, that is going to be something that you want to play with because basically I can make smaller movements to get it to react more. And that's something that could help benefit the way you drive. And again, I'll show this in game. But that is the one of the main settings that we want to adjust and experiment with. Again, best advice I can give, start at 360. But then if you're finding that, you're turning the wheel too much to get the input that you want, then try lowering it so you can make smaller movements to get the same amount of turning. Okay, so the second main setting that we want to focus on is the brake sensitivity. So obviously I've moved over into my pedal section here. And what I'm going to be worrying about here is the brake force level, and that is basically braking sensitivity. Now, for more established simulators like iRacing or Assetto Corsa Competizione, I leave my brake force at 50%. And now, I know you can't see me pressing on my brake pedal, but let's say I just want to tap it. Okay, if I just push it a little bit, I'm at about 20%. If I want to get to 100%, I literally need to push all my body weight into this, and it's going to kind of push me back into my seat. But again, you want that much pressure when you are working with a long, like let's say a big long sweeping curve, or you need to worry about trail braking. it's a lot more advantageous to have a stiff, firm pedal that allows you to work on force. Now, huge tip that's going to be one of the factors to determine about what products you get into. If you get into something with a load cell pedal, because of the amount of force that you need to push into it, I would not advise getting one unless you also get a full chassis and a seat that is kind of designed for sim racing. The reason why is because it takes so much force to push down a load cell pedal that if you were just to use this on like a desktop and put the pedals on the floor, the amount of pressure that you'll need to push the brake properly will send you flying in your regular chair. Even if it's not on wheels, if it's just a static chair, you will literally get pushed right off the chair by the amount of pressure you need. So if you want to get into a load cell pedal, I would advise getting the full gamut of a full sim rig, okay? Or at least make sure that your sitting position is going to be very stiff and nothing will move. Because again, every movement that you make that is not going directly to your gear is going to be slippage and it's going to make you more inaccurate. So if I push hard on my pedal and my seat moves back and forth, that is not going to allow me to be as consistent. Whereas if I know that my seat doesn't move an inch when I push into it, then that's going to help me know exactly how much pressure to push in every single time. Okay? So again, big disclaimer if you're going to get into a load cell pedal. If you just want something that's a potentiometer pedal, and every brand, most brands have either or, then it's much easier to push down and you're not going to need to have such an extensive rig. But let's talk about the setting here, okay? So if I want to just tap the pedal and get more braking out of that, I could move the brake force down. So if I bring it down to 20% and just tap it, now I'm at 40%, okay? If I bring it down even more and just tap it, now I easily get to 60, 70%. So if I want to easily get to 100% braking, even on a load cell pedal, I can adjust this setting. And let's talk about why we want to focus on this for Midnight in WIami. I talked about it briefly at the beginning, but here's the main idea. Most of the braking in my Midnight in WIami is going to be very quick, and it's going to be wanting to get to pretty much, a high level between, let's call it 70 and 90% braking. And you want to be able to do that quick with a very quick input, okay? And by adjusting the brake force here, I could then use my load cell pedal and just tap it and know that I'm going to get to 100% or at least 90 to 80% very quickly, okay? And I don't need as much sensitivity. I don't need as much, accuracy when I'm doing it. I just want to make sure that I could get to full braking and get off very quickly. So by lowering the brake force, it's going to help you be able to get to the right braking that works for you. And it's different for everybody, okay? Some people have a lead foot and they don't mind pushing hard and they want that full, that full experience. But again, the idea is to be consistent and to be fast. So playing with this setting is very, very important. Even if you have a potentiometer-based pedal, you want to experiment with it and just practice in-game to see what works for you. And you might even be able to change this depending on what car you use. Now, there's the different cars that we have in this current build of Midnight in WIami are already very responsive to different types of braking. So you might have one setup that you use for, the WIami, and then you have a different one for the Wambo. And I could easily adjust that with the tuning menu. In this software, if I want to, like right now, I have setup number 1 to be for all my regular sim racing games like iRacing and Assetto Corsa. So I have the brake force set to 50, and I have the turning radius set to auto. Now, setup 2 is for when I play Midnight in WIami. The sensitivity here is set to 360. We just did that. I'm actually using it more like around 270 or 280. But you can see the brake force is about 10, 15%. So when I played Midnight WIami, I just hit setup 2, and I know that it's dialed in. But if I want to go even deeper and maybe do a setup per car, I could easily do that in the software, and that is what gives you that edge. That is what gives you that little bit of extra something to have more control over the car, which will, let you find a tenth of a second here, a hundredth of a second here, and those are the things that really help get you higher and higher up on that leaderboard. So those are the settings. Let's now get into the game and show some examples, and then also talk about some basic techniques of using the wheel and pedals in game. Okay, so now we're inside the game, and what we're going to first do is make sure we know how to set up our wheel and pedals so that the game recognizes it, all right? We're going to do that by going to the settings wheel up at the top, and we're going to go over to the controls menu, okay? So what I want to do here is in the game input, select steering wheel, all right? So the first thing that you want to do is for steering, you're going to hit the rebind button, okay? And then all you got to do is move your wheel, or if I hit reset and then rebind, when I move my wheel, you could see that it recognized it. And that's all you got to do to make sure it knows that the steering works, okay? With the throttle, I'm going to hit rebind, and then I'm going to press down my gas pedal, and you can see that it recognizes it, okay? Same thing with the brake. So we're going to reset, we're going to say rebind, hit the brake pedal, and that's all you need to do for it to know what the brake pedal is. Now, the rest of the settings, you could go ahead and assign to whatever you want and what makes sense. A couple tips. I have a clutch pedal on my setup, so I have a gas, a brake, and a clutch. I like setting my handbrake to the clutch pedal, okay? So that way, if I want to, quickly do it, it's right next to my brake. If you could also, though, assign it to a button or if you're, or a paddle shifter on your wheel if you have it, okay? All the other settings, again, depending on your wheel, some of them have a million buttons, some of them have a few buttons, but you could go ahead and pick whatever you want your other buttons to do, which make moving through the game nice and smooth, okay? Picking your next car, your previous car, all these types of things. There's two other really important ones. Rectify is one of them, because if you kind of crash into a wall, you could hit the rectify button and it'll quickly move you into a place where you can get going again. So that's a pretty important button to focus on. The one that's most important in my opinion, though, is the NOS. And here's some tips that I found helpful. Now, on my wheel here that I use, I actually have two sets of paddle shifters on the back, okay? So right here, you can see that I have one at the top, and then these two at the top are basically what I use for shifting. Now, right now, everything in Midnight WIami is automatic shifting, so you don't have to worry about shifting up and down. But below that, I also have what's called an analog paddle. This has more resistance, and it's more of like a potentiometer. So it has different levels of input. And you could even use this for throttle and gas if for whatever reason you didn't want to use your feet. But I have all of these options to use on my actual wheel. Now, what I found, though, is I set the NOS to basically using the analog paddles on my wheel. Something to consider is that you want to be able to access your NOS very quickly in any situation. Now, if I assign the NOS to a button, let's say on the top right of my wheel, and I have a turn that I'm doing a hard right, it's kind of hard for me to get to my thumb down here when I'm turning. So you might want to consider doing something else than a button for your NOS. And that's why I use one of my paddle shifters, because no matter what position I'm in, my fingers are always ready to go on my shifters. So I assign my NOS to one of my paddles, so that way no matter what way I'm turning, I can quickly access the NOS. So something to play with. It's something that everybody can kind of choose what works best, but definitely experiment with it because you want to be able to access that very quickly. You could even try assigning it to something like the clutch pedal if that works for you. So again, it's kind of fun to experiment with it, but that's a really, really important one since NOS is a very critical part of being fast in the game. So there's a little tip there. So that's how we get everything set up. Once you're done with all that, hit apply. And that's going to go ahead and you should be pretty much good to go. Okay, so we've gone over a lot. Let's get into the game and put all this stuff to practice and have some fun. So what we're going to talk about first is the braking settings, all right? And I'm going to do, let's do C side, and we're actually going to go in reverse. What I want to start off doing is an example of doing just a straight line and braking in a straight line. We're not going to worry about turning or doing anything else because what we want to experiment with is just seeing how braking reacts in a straight line. Because to be honest, one of the number one techniques you want to get used to doing in any game for racing or in real life is brake in a straight line before you turn, okay? Yes, there is advanced techniques for what we call trail braking, which is where you let off of the brake while you turn, okay? But we're not going to do that. Let's go ahead and use the Wantide. And what we're going to do is just get going with a good amount of speed and then just hit the brakes and find out how long it takes for our car to actually come to a complete stop, okay? So, again, what we're going to do is just turn around because this is a really long straightaway. So, what we're going to do here is get up to speed. And with my current brake settings, okay, I want to slam on my brakes and figure out how long it takes to get to full braking, okay? Let me actually get to where my UI shows my speedometer. Let's show all this stuff. I turn all these things off generally because it does help keep the ping lower. Just a little tip. So coming back here, let's get back to it. Okay, so now you can see my speed. So anyways, what I'm going to experiment with is, right now, I have my brake pressure set to, or sensitivity set to 20%. Let's say I want to go to 10% and see how that reacts to playing the game and being able to stop quickly, okay? So, again, getting up to speed. And what I'm experimenting with is, does it make any difference if I'm at 10% or if I'm at, let's say, 50%? Because if you notice, the car pretty much brakes the same way. It's just that I need to press it a lot harder in this game if I want to get to full braking. So because, again, current build of my Midnight in WIami does not have anything where you need to do trail braking, and most of the braking you're going to do is very stiff or I should say it's very strong. I want to easily be able to get to 100% braking, okay? So again, the best way to do this is just test this out on a straightaway and figure out when you're going maybe like, let's say 140, how long does it take me to get to a full stop, okay? And then you could experiment with the brake force. So that's the first way to test that out. Now the second is pick a turn that is very straightforward, okay? We don't want anything that's like chicane, which is like an S-turn, or anything that's a long bend. Now, this first one here is kind of a bendy turn, right? But this turn, 90 degree. I'm just going to do a quick touch of the brake and then turn, okay? So this is a good example of what I want to achieve when I brake for most turns. I'm going to be coming at this turn very fast. But even so, I'm only going to be using my brakes for a second, a real quick touch, and that's enough for me to be able to manage this first turn, okay? So, let's go ahead and turn around and get going on speed, and I'll show you how I approach this turn with braking. So, coming up. Okay, I don't need to brake here. Just a quick touch, and that's it. That was enough to kind of slow me down and get back and make the turn efficiently. Again, quick brake, off. All right, so when you're experimenting with the sensitivity, the goal is to get full braking very easily. All right, there's not too many other things to talk about with this in regards to it. It's just a matter of, learning how to, what I should say, where to brake. So you want to make sure that you're setting visual cues for when you need to hit the brake and when you need to get to full braking. So something to kind of consider. The other thing is that certain cars have anti-lock brakes or ABS. That's certainly something that's prevalent in other sims like iRacing and Assetto Corsa. Depending on the type of car, if it has ABS, it's a totally different experience and technique of braking than if it doesn't have it. So not something to go too in-depth with, but it's something that you want to experiment with this with each car in Midnight in WIami, because, again, they all have different braking responses, but do it in a straight line. Figure out how much braking it takes to get to 100%, but also how quickly can you stop. And that's basically what I advise to do to get used to braking. So now let's talk about some steering techniques. Okay, so to highlight some techniques on steering, I'm going to be using, we're going to go to Meridian Surge. And we're going to deal with one of the corners on here that is pretty sharp, but you're coming at it very fast. Okay, so we're going to jump into this track. We'll stick with the Wantide, but something to first, again, experiment with is understanding how each car reacts to steering, and especially at different speeds, okay? Because that's something that every car in every sim, in every game, is going to react differently. So that's something you got to get to know, and that's, again, why we might want to use different settings for different cars, okay? So we're going to stick with the Wantide. Something like the WIami, it might have a higher top speed, but it does not handle well on turning at high speed. So something to get used to and might want to do different settings for. Okay, so now we're heading into turn 5 on Meridian Surge. We have a really long straightaway, and then it's going to be a really tight right-hander. Now, here's my software. So again, I'm starting this at 360 degrees sensitivity. So if I turn my wheel 90 degrees, it's going to get to about the middle of, the second and third dash there, okay? If I bring this down to, let's say, 250, and I bring it there, it's going to get past that third dash, okay? So smaller sensitivity means more turning radius, okay? Now, if I go to 360, here's something that happens that is something that could be holding you back when you're using a wheel for the first time, okay? So, if we get towards this turn, what we're going to talk about is understeer and what happens when it happens, and what is the cause of it, and also what is the consequence of it. So, here comes the turn. I'm going to brake hard, turn. Now, if you notice, I turned my wheel, it stayed turned, but the car was not turning anymore. That is what we call understeer. You've reached the maximum amount of turning that the car is able to do given its physics and given your speed. So how do we fix that? Go slower and the car will turn more, okay? So this is a concept that's really important to understand, because no matter if I turn my wheel more, it's not going to make the car turn more. So if I've already got my wheel and I've turned it, 180 degrees, to unwind that, to turn, let's say I was able to make the turn. Now my hands are like this. And to get back straight, I need to kind of turn everything back around and unwind it all. And that's hard to be very accurate when I only needed to make a 90-degree turn, okay? So what you got to understand is that how does the car respond? How much input do I need to give it to get the turn completed? And this is where now, instead of at 360 degrees, I'm going to move it down to, let's say, 280, okay? And again, what this is essentially going to do is make it so that I don't need to turn the wheel as far to induce the same amount of steering input. So now I can make a smaller amount of motion, get the same amount of input, and that allows me to unwind the wheel less. I still need to make sure I understand how much turning my car can take at any given speed. But what I found is that because I only usually need to make 90-degree turns, I don't want to be able to move my wheel 180 degrees to make a full round turn. It's just too much for this game. So by going smaller, I can make smaller movements, get back straight, and that's where you find all those small tenths or hundredths of a second. So now, again, I'm going to work with a smaller degree here of sensitivity. So we're at 280. We're going to brake more, or we're going to brake a little bit earlier, but watch what we do here now. So, okay, so it wasn't, I still hit, but you notice that I was able to start feeling the car, it turned, and now I was like right here with my wheel. So to get straight, I just had to go to this level of turning instead of being all the way around here, because I'm thinking that, I just need to turn the wheel more for it to get it to move. That's not the case. I am understeering, and no matter how much I turn the wheel, it's not going to make a difference. I need to work on the speed I'm going at. And therefore, once you dial that in, then you could find that, hey, I just need to do here and I need to get back straight, okay? There's some turns where, if it's oversteering, you could actually, move it back quick and get it straight. And that makes a big difference with, again, pointing the car in the right direction. The split second that the front of my car is headed in the direction I want, I need to make sure my wheel is straight. If I've gotten my car to the degree I want it, but my wheel is still turned, those are split seconds that's going to cost you a lot of time. So you want to make sure that you only turn enough to get the nose of your car pointed in the direction you want so that you can get back on throttle and get back up to speed. And by then, you want your wheel straight and then ready for the next input that you need to do. And that is something that you need to experiment with the sensitivity. So hopefully that example, kind of put into practice why you want to experiment with it. And again, it's going to depend on the car because different cars have different physics and some of them are more responsive. But it's the one setting that you want to make sure that you play with when you're on a wheel because it makes a huge, huge difference. If you think about a keyboard, you only have on or off. That's why it's the worst, device to use. A keyboard with a left and right arrow, it's just full left or full right steering. Very hard to give it inputs. If you're on a game controller, you're going to probably use, your two thumb rotary knobs, which has a little bit more level of degrees that you could move everything. But it's such a small little tool that it's harder to be more precise. Don't get me wrong. Some of the top guys that are building the top times right now are on a controller. So it can be done. But using a wheel, not only for me is it more fun and more immersive, especially once you start getting force feedback, you will start being able to feel the turn more and which will allow you to be more precise. And that's something that, again, right now, until we have force feedback for the game, and that's something to make sure that you understand that this is a very timely thing when I'm making this video, okay? In future builds, when force feedback becomes more prevalent, that'll totally change, but it's still a setting that you want to play with and understand because all the other things, not as important as that sensitivity. So hopefully that helps and makes sense. All right, so before I close out, I wanted to give just another couple very important tips I found were really helpful, again, when you're using a wheel and pedals. The number one thing, most important, is to relax, okay? I say this because when you get into this wheel and pedal setup, everything becomes more intense and immersive. It's a blast. It's so fun. But it's also something where you then get into this situation where everything gets tense and everything just gets locked up. If you want to get better at something, you need to get relaxed, okay? Anything that involves muscle movements, the more relaxed you are and the more focus you only are putting on the actual muscles that need to do the work, the better you'll be. The other whole goal along with speed is to get into the flow, okay? To me, sim racing is a total flow sport. You cannot get into a state of flow if everything's tense and everything's just gripping like hell. I mean, that's the other thing about being relaxed. You cannot grip the wheel so hard that everything's tense. I'm not going to lie. I got into this hard when I first played it, and it generated pain in my shoulder. I had pains in my fingers from gripping so hard, because I realized that I was like, just everything was so tense. So I had to really think about being relaxed when I got into this immersive of a setup. Something I highly advise doing is setting up a camera and record yourself while you drive. You'll be surprised to look at yourself and see like, oh my God, I'm freaking gripping everything. My neck's all tight and everything's, just jacked up. Relax, breathe. Try to think about being relaxed because it'll help you give more precise inputs, okay? The other tip I'll give is to, again, only move what needs to be moved, okay? It's immersive, it's fun, but doing this is totally unnecessary, okay? You might have the screen right in front of you. You might be in the middle of a really engaging race, but moving your head side to side, moving your body, it's only going to throw you off. So you don't need to move anything but your hands and your feet, okay? That, again, is going to give you more precise accuracy in your driving. So think about only moving what needs to be moved, and that'll help a ton. The last big tip I'm going to give you is work on getting your posture correct. If you're in a wheel and pedal setup, and especially if you get something like a full sim racing rig with a chassis and a proper chair, you really need to spend time on making sure that your ergonomics of how everything is set up is proper. You could look at videos on how to do all this stuff, and you also look at videos on reviews. Boosted Media is a YouTube channel, the best I've ever found, that they review every damn product you can imagine in sim racing. So if you're looking at a specific set of pedals and wheels or a seat or anything or a chassis, they pretty much review everything on the market. So check them out. It's the best source of reviews that I've found. But they also have videos that talk about how to properly set yourself up in your chair, because like anything else, if you're not set up properly, you're going to be spending hours in this setup. And if you're not set up perfectly right, you're going to induce pain, whether it's in your knee because you're too close to the pedals or because, your arms are too far away from the wheel. So spend time adjusting for proper ergonomics and that you're properly comfortable so that you don't hurt yourself, and that also all of the inputs that you're doing are going to go directly into making you a faster and more precise racer. So hopefully that helps, and get out there and have fun. If you like this video and you want to show some support, you could join the Wilder Racing Academy for exclusive benefits, additional content, and interact with other members to ask questions, share tips, and much more. The Wilder Racing Academy uses the Zero Name Service Protocol, which is a social media platform utilizing Web3 technology to provide a token-gated community for its members. To learn more about ZNS, visit zero.tech/worlds. So now I'm going to walk you through how to join the Wilder Racing Academy by registering your own member ID using the Zero Name Service. First off, go to explorer.zero.tech. You're going to connect this service to your Web3 wallet. I'm going to use MetaMask. Next, you'll need a total of 265 Meow tokens plus some ETH to pay for gas fees. We can get the Meow tokens on Uniswap. To make sure you get to the right place, just click the link in the right-hand menu for Buy Meow. You can use a number of different currencies to swap for Meow. I'm going to use some ETH. Select our token that we want to swap with, and then select the amount of Meow tokens you want. So we're going to put in 265. At the time of this video, Meow is around 3 cents, so it's just a little over $8. We're going to go ahead and swap this and approve and confirm. All right, now that we have our Meow tokens, we could register our ID. We're going to go to the ID box and look for Wilder Racing Academy. And we're going to click on View World. Next, click the link for Join World and then type in the member ID you want to use. I also wanted to point out that this is a one-time fee and there are no renewal fees. Plus, you could refund it at any time if you want to cancel. So I'm going to go ahead and click Mint Domain. Click Confirm. And now we'll need to approve 2 transactions. First, we need to approve the token spending. The domain price is $250, the stake fee is $555, and the protocol fee is $943 for a total of 264 Meow tokens. So we'll go ahead and approve spending. And finally, we're going to mint our domain. Click Mint Domain, approve the transaction in your Web3 wallet, and keep in mind that gas fees will vary depending on when you register. And that's it. You're now a member and can keep up to date with the community using the Zero Messenger app. You can learn more about that at zero.tech/messenger. We look forward to seeing you as the newest member, and thank you for your support.